Hello, everybody. Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. My name is Martin Loffers. I'm the Chief Trend Watcher of Supply Chain Media. You also may know me as the Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Movement. Welcome to this webinar. We're going to discuss end-to-end supply chain visibility, and we will do this with three experts of PwC. We have a lot of people registered today. So as you see me on the left, that's me, Martin Loffers, Chief Trend Watcher of Supply Chain Media. And with me, I have three experts actually from PwC. First, Judith Schneider from Germany. Hi, Judith.
Hello, Martin.
So hi there. And next to Judith, we have Rolf Bos from the Netherlands. Hi, Rolf.
Hi, Martijn.
And finally, we also have Louis Verheijen from Belgium.
Hey, Martijn. Hi, everyone.
So, hello, everybody. So we have an interesting webinar the coming hour. We are recording the session, so don't worry. And also the presentation will be made available in 48 hours as a PDF. Everybody is on mute, but we want interaction. So you can chat among each other, you see the chat function on the right side, and you see the question mark, and you can start ask questions right away. So we will have a Q&A at the end, but if you have a question about something being said at the moment and it's in line of the discussion, I will ask this question immediately. So you have also the ability to ask some questions during the webinar. At the end of the webinar, we have a Q&A, and after that, after 5 o'clock European time, we have an after talk in a lounge. So you have 30 minutes afterwards. You can talk to the experts at tables in a lounge. Some of you have already done it in the past weeks. So you can ask also other questions to the experts. And you can talk among each other. So this is how it's set up. So let's start. So first, why do we talk about end-to-end supply chain visibility? So Supply Chain Media has done research in March last year among 142 manufacturing and a few retail companies in Europe. And basically what we saw, apart from bottlenecks in and outbound flows, was a lot of visibility lacking, both on the demand side from customer side and on the supply side. So Judith, is it also something what you saw in your practice last year?
Yeah, that's very much aligned with what we saw during last year. So a lot of companies were actually challenged by seeing the demand changes immediately, the supply changes, but also the risks related to the current crisis. So visibility was one of the major challenges that companies were actually facing.
Mm-hmm. So another study we did later that year, so in June, we asked the same manufacturing retail companies what were their planned investments for the coming 12 months. And sales and operations planning is number one, but end-to-end supply chain visibility is coming up as number two. And as you see in this graph, the leading companies that have 4 or 5 supply chain maturity on a 1 to 5 scale, they have more plans in visibility. And going down, you see also real-time transport visibility is coming up among the leading companies to invest in the coming 12 months. So this is what we have done last year as Supply Chain Media, but PwC has also done a huge survey. So Judith, can you explain what PwC has done, how the study looked like?
Yeah, very happy to do so. Yeah, so PwC conducted one of the largest global supply chain studies last year, which is based on more than 1,600 interviews with supply chain and operations executives. The major objective of the study was to identify the key trends in supply chain and find out into which supply chain capabilities the digital champions are investing into. And the study has a global coverage with 33 countries across EMEA, Americas, and APEC. So it's representing really the global supply chains of this world.
But the study itself was done before COVID-19 pandemic.
That is correct. The study as such was done before COVID, but we then actually validated the key results, and we basically found out that those topics have actually become even more important during the COVID crisis or after COVID started.
Yeah, and we also see from two cases, Louis and Rolf will present what the impact of COVID-19 was at those companies. In the research, you are talking about the supply chain ecosystem. Could you elaborate more about the ecosystem and how visibility is taking part of that whole ecosystem?
Yeah. Let me explain you what the digital champions have been focusing on. And the digital champions have been focusing during the last years to build up an end-to-end connected supply chain ecosystem. And with an end-to-end connected supply chain ecosystem, we mean that they are directly collaborating with their supply chain partners, like their suppliers across multiple tiers, like their logistics service partners and other partners across the supply chain. And they build up a data network where each party has simultaneous access to the same and relevant information across the supply chain. And they have used that ecosystem to focus on 4 major supply chain capabilities. So one is around closed loop integrated planning and execution. So that was one of the highest priorities for the digital champions to invest into advanced planning capabilities. The second capability is around supply chain visibility and sustainability. So the digital champions have put a lot of focus on generating visibility across their end-to-end supply chain, all the way from their suppliers and sub-suppliers to their customers and consumers, to generate a near real-time picture about what is currently happening in the supply chain and optimize the supply chain. Thirdly, they have been focusing on investing into smart logistics flows and into dynamic supply chain segmentation to cater for the different needs and requirements, for example, from different channels. And all those 4 capabilities are then boosted by advanced analytics and artificial intelligence to make better, more accurate, and quicker decisions to optimize the supply chain holistically.
And if you look, you have also researched the impact of it. So what is the impact in investing in those supply chain capabilities to build this?
Mm-hmm. So the impact shows that the investment into advanced supply chain capabilities pay off. So we have found out the payback period for supply chain investments is about 2 years for the digital champions. And the digital champions have generated significant benefits on the revenue and on the cost side. So what we can see here on this slide is that the digital champions have achieved about 8% additional revenue from their investments into supply chain capabilities, which is twice as much as what we call the digital novices, so the companies being less mature and less advanced in the supply chain area. And then on the other hand, they have also been able to reduce their costs. So the digital champions achieved 7% cost savings of their supply chain costs last year, which is also almost twice as much as the digital novices. So what we can see here is that supply chain has really become a profit contributor in the overall business model and has become a key differentiator for companies.
Okay, and getting deeper into supply chain visibility. So what is the essence of supply chain visibility? How do you get there?
The essence of supply chain visibility is basically to generate a digital twin of what is actually happening across my end-to-end supply chain. So it's basically to have instant visibility into my supply chain. And in order to generate that supply chain visibility, companies are first of all building up what we call here a 360-degree supply chain data network, which captures all the supply chain data and their relationships end to end. So that means that we are able to connect the relationships all the way from our sub-suppliers, suppliers within manufacturing, distribution, all the way to our customers and build up a semantic data network of our supply chain. And then companies are using this data network to to work on different capabilities. One of them is around having near real-time visibility of the physical supply chain flows, enrich those information with external data like traffic information, weather information, port information in order to dynamically calculate the arrival time of the shipments and proactively alert the customer or the receiving party in case we have a delay in our shipment, so that the receiving party accurately knows when the products will actually arrive. In addition to that, companies are also using supply chain visibility to generate end-to-end traceability and chain of custody of their products. That enables them to really know where the products are coming from, which materials and components have been used to produce the product, and also communicate those origins of the products to the end customer and end consumer, which is also becoming more and more important. And then the next capability is around what we call here end-to-end supply chain visibility, basically having a real-time picture of my inventory situation, capacity situation, of my latest planning information in order to proactively identify potentials for optimization. Another capability connected to visibility is the cost to serve visibility, which enables us to have cost visibility down to transactional level, identify the profit contribution of our supply chain, and then also optimize our supply chain from a more financial perspective. And then the last stage is what we call here a smart and AI-enabled control tower, which enables end-to-end collaboration, optimization, and finally then automated decisions.
This almost looked like a Valhalla, a complete control tower with all kind of visibilities on operational, tactical, and strategic level. But how far are companies in this matter?
Yeah, exactly. So companies and also the digital champions have embarked on that journey. And what we found out during our research is that 84% of the digital champions have already achieved product content visibility, compared to about 50% of all companies. And then the next evolution is around financial visibility, where almost 70% of the digital champions have achieved financial visibility, and about 60% have achieved real-time logistics visibility. Then when we go to the more, let's say, more advanced capabilities, like having a digital twin of the supply chain, the number already goes down to 50% of the digital champions. And an AI-enabled control tower to achieve orchestration, automated decision-making is, from our perspective, really the next level of supply chain visibility, which is very high on the agenda of companies, but actually only 13% of the digital champions have already fully implemented an AI-enabled control tower. So that's one of the next level of visibility.
So, but all in all, you see a huge difference between, the digital champions and the rest.
Yeah, that's correct. We see a big difference between the companies that have actually invested into generating that visibility and have embarked on that journey. And that also became very clear now during the pandemic, that the companies that have that level of visibility, they have been able to actually more stabilize their supply chains in a much quicker way compared to other companies.
Yeah, and the middle bar about near real-time logistic visibility. You see new kind of software called real-time transport visibility. There are several vendors growing very rapidly, and also from our study, we saw that the leading companies are planning more to invest in this kind of environment than the rest. Okay, thank you, Judith, for this explanation. Next, what kind of solution are you present as PwC? And to ask that, Louis, you have an example from mining equipment manufacturing. So could you explain what you have done at this company to create visibility?
Yeah, sure. Let me first maybe say a few words about our clients. So in this case, our client is indeed a leading mining equipment manufacturer with around 3.8 billion revenues, around 14,000 employees. So let's say a big player. If you actually look at, let's say, their business segments, on one hand, of course, they produce mining equipment, so capital equipment, meaning drill rigs or handheld devices, etc. But our scope was actually focusing more on the aftermarket, meaning the spare parts, business, service, supply chain, also tools and attachments, so consumables, if you wish, so the drill bits which are actually used in mining. If you actually look at the mining industry itself, although it's cyclical, it's also predictive, which means that you can use forecasting techniques, etc. But if we take a close look at our clients, let's say supply chain, we could actually see that it was very decentralized and fragmented. So we had raw material warehouses, we have production facilities, we have global European distribution centers, we have central warehouses in countries, local distribution centers. I mean, a couple of hundreds, let's say, stocking points ultimately, which were all managed, again, decentralized. There were multiple ERP systems running. There was not a single APS implemented, a lot of manual interfaces, Excel files flying around, so a very, let's say, old-fashioned supply chain, if I might call it like this. Which of course ultimately led to a couple of things. On one hand, customer service was quite low, so the service level was not where it's supposed to be. The supply chain costs and transportation and inventory was increasing, and compared to the competitors was, let's say, at a very high level. But also from a supply perspective, production constraints were impacting future growth. So they were producing too much of the things that they didn't need, and then ultimately had to scrap it again. And they were not producing enough of the products that they did need to produce. So in end of 2018, they decided to partner up with PwC to actually transform their supply chain into, let's say, a more efficient one.
A question, in how many countries this manufacturing company has offices and production sites and DCs?
More than 70.
Oh, okay.
It's a global player. Yeah.
All right. So what was your solution?
Yeah. So we actually proposed to run them through, let's say, a multi-year transformation program, supply chain transformation program, actually focusing on a few elements. First one was a global network design study, deciding, let's say, where you're going to produce what, where you're going to keep which stock, etc., which warehouses should be close, but also, of course, linked to best practice process optimization, implementing SNOP, MPS, inventory management. And from a tooling perspective, I think here important as well is setting up that ERP system properly, choosing an APS to implement, and actually driving the implementation was focus. But also from an organization perspective, let's say we actually designed a new cross-departmental supply chain organization around 800 FTEs to help execute this supply chain. So this started then end of 2018, beginning of 2019. If we go to the next slide. So the numbers that you see here are actual numbers for Australia, if I'm not mistaken. So the cost per kilogram that was actually shipped via air in a few months went times 3, times 4, for some countries even more. And you can imagine in mining industry, I mean, you ship quite a few kilograms, so it had a huge cost impact, especially for the spare parts business, because spare parts is so often you have emergency shipments, etc., which are done via air. So the cost element there was quite significant. Also, from a demand perspective, we actually saw increased demand volatility in an otherwise, let's say, stable market, especially I would say in South Africa. A lot of mines actually closed, which meant that consumables, the consumption of consumables drastically reduced there. But also in Latin America, we saw some mines closing down, which had an impact, of course, on the demand side. From a supply perspective, we had similar issues, let's say, because certain countries took measurements, meaning that certain companies could not run, let's say, in multiple shifts. Some facilities were even closed down. So we were, let's say, blocked from that perspective as well. So if we go back to the previous slide, maybe to summarize, COVID-19 actually led to an immediate need for more visibility and actionable insights. I mean, we had to act immediately because costs were overnight tripling in certain cases. So what did we actually do is we decided to set up a control tower in a few weeks to actually provide this end-to-end supply chain visibility. So including all of our clients' supply chain entities, from the raw material warehouse up until all the local country DCs. We've actually set up one transportation, inventory, service level, finance, and commercial data. where we could actually both, let's say, do operational analysis, for example, shipped weight evolution, inventory evolution, etc., but also financial analysis for transportation costs, for example. And as most of you know, let's say the true value lies in the intersection of the two. I mean, if you can influence your operational KPIs and then track, let's say, the impact on your financials, you can actually deliver value. Some of the benefits that we actually saw setting up this control tower, the reason why we set it up, is that this visibility could actually help us determine focus and priority. Yeah? So I mentioned earlier, we have 70 countries. And the control tower actually allowed us to see in which countries did we have the most transportation violations. So air shipments where we should have expected sea shipments, for example, where we have late order allocations, ultimately leading to emergency shipments, etc. So we could pinpoint easily from a central point of view, let's say the problem areas. Second one is fast capturing of potential issues and deviations and to reduce the response time. Just going to give an example here. At one point, South Africa placed a significant order on the factory in Sweden for an air shipment. We spotted this in the control tower proactively, and we actually saw in the control tower that they actually requested this air shipment due to stock out, which makes sense. But we could also see in the control tower that there was some excess stock in Congo. And as I mentioned earlier, given the fact that there was not a single ERP system or not a common platform, South Africa was not able to actually see this themselves. But in the control tower, it was spotted. And ultimately, let's say we've set up a country-to-country shipment, so from Congo to South Africa, instead of an air shipment from Sweden to South Africa. Third, performance calls where we actually showed, let's say, the countries and how they were doing and get their feedback. And this, I would say, had a huge impact also from a cultural perspective to help change the organization into a more, let's say, performance mindset. Last but not least, I think information sharing with key client users to help the decision-making process makes sense because you have one landing page which is easy to go to.
But the interesting thing is that you're talking about one landing page. Sometimes you talk about a control tower as if it's a physical building of all kind of screens, but basically creating this overview in a landing page gives already a lot of results and oversight.
Correct. That's indeed correct. There was one link which was shared with the full organization, which made it easy because everybody was looking at the same numbers, so one version of the truth, and that has a huge benefit indeed. So
in the end, what are the results? Can you give some highlights?
Yeah, sure. Good point. So if we actually look at the results, both from an operational as a financial perspective, they were quite significant. So on the left-hand side, you could actually see the air weight graph, so the percentage of weight that was shipped via air compared to sea or land. For the spare parts business, which is typically, let's say, a business where you ship a lot via air, we could actually see more or less a 40% reduction in air weight as of the moment that the control tower went down. I see that the graph only shows until July, but also in August, September, etc., we still saw some significant reductions there. But especially in a consumable business, so the graph below the slide, on the bottom of the slide, sorry, you could actually see that there was a 66% reduction in air weight, which was quite significantly. And this then immediately translates, and that's the nice thing I would say, immediately translates into P&L impact, so EBIT impact of around 5 to 10 million euros per quarter in this case, which was also validated by the controllers of the clients. I think this underlies again the importance of end-to-end supply chain visibility and how it can help realize immediate and real savings.
Getting to the point, about the different levels of visibility, operational, tactical, and strategic. Can you explain how this is constructed?
I think this is Judith's slides.
Oh, Judith, maybe you can explain to this slide how it is constructed.
Yes, exactly. So, I mean, in addition to visibility and knowing what is actually happening in the supply chain, end-to-end integrated planning is a key enabler to basically optimize the supply chain and proactively identify potential changes on the demand or the supply side. So when we talk about an integrated end-to-end planning, we are basically looking at two major dimensions. One is what we call here the vertical integration, meaning a direct connection between the strategic planning, the tactical planning, and the operational planning, with a direct link to our execution of the supply chain. And secondly, we look at horizontal integration. But here we mean really including our customers into our planning activities, planning the internal supply chain activities all the way then to the suppliers, and in some cases even the sub-suppliers. So integrated planning really spans all the way from the customers to the supply side. And advanced companies, they perform integrated end-to-end planning and execution at the clock speed of the customer. If you could just quickly go to slide before, please.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, exactly. At the speed of the customer, meaning they have the capabilities to continuously replan their supply chain once changes either on the demand or supply side have been identified. So when we look into the detailed capabilities of end-to-end planning, it's all the way around demand planning and proactive demand sensing, meaning that we are able to take all demand influencing factors into consideration, apply AI and advanced analytics to generate more accurate forecasts on very granular levels, meaning basically per SKU, per DC or customer per day at least. Then on the supply side, it's all about supply and inventory planning, a direct connection to production planning and scheduling and logistics planning, and then being able to balance the demand and the supply side. So this is more now the supply chain perspective, but also the integration with financial planning, with marketing and sales planning, and product portfolio planning is key in order to achieve the full vision of an fully integrated planning process.
Okay. Yeah, and you have also in your research asked some questions about end-to-end planning. Maybe you can relate to that.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So end-to-end planning was one of the key differentiators for the digital champions. And what we can see here is that more than 50% of the digital champions have achieved vertical integration across the time horizons. So they are really able to synchronize their strategic, tactical, and operational planning and are linking their planning information to the execution of the supply chain. Then about 40% have already achieved a horizontal integration of their planning activities, meaning that they have a seamless planning collaboration with their suppliers, with their customers, and have continuous and simultaneous exchange of planning data and information. Then about 40% apply advanced analytics and planning, such as demand sensing or advanced analytics in the area of inventory planning, for example. And then only 29% are already able to dynamically plan their end-to-end supply chain network and performing what-if scenario analysis and optimize the plans based on different parameters. And then the last or the highest maturity level is what we call here synchronized closed loop planning directly connected to execution, which is really the capability to automate a lot of the planning activities from the demand planning, supply planning side, and then to continuously replan the supply chain based on changes and then directly link those updated planning information to the execution side, like dynamic replenishment or configuration of the warehouses and the transportation. So this is also one of the level, which is, let's say, one of the focus areas of the digital champions now to achieve that level of highly automated and synchronized planning.
I got a question from the audience. Do digital champions feature across all industry sectors, or are they concentrated in particular verticals?
That's a great question. So basically, there are digital champions across different industries. But what we have identified is that some industries have achieved a higher level of share of digital champions than others. So, for example, fast-moving consumer goods has one of the highest shares of digital champions across industries, but also the automotive industry has quite a high share. So there are differences in terms of maturity across industries, and also, let's say, pockets of excellence across different industries.
Another question also related to this slide. What kind of tools are the digital champions using to get this visibility into their supply chain, and how granular is their view?
Mm-hmm. So the digital champions, they have invested and have built up cloud-based end-to-end planning platforms where they are able to directly link to their customers and suppliers, and also planning platforms that have the ability to support advanced analytics and AI, like demand sensing or even supply sensing. So the important, I think the important changes that they have made is to invest into solutions based on modern technologies that support advanced analytics, that are able to integrate external partners into the planning process, which and those advanced analytics capabilities are also the key enabler to plan on a much more granular level.
Yeah, and in some companies, they have data lakes to extract all kind of data from their ERP instances and WMS, TMS, and CRM, that kind of stuff in a data lake, where on top of that, they can connect it to cloud-based solutions for either to connect with your customers or your suppliers.
Exactly. And that's what we refer to as the connected data network, which is then used for the planning layer and the visibility layer. And then basically by also seamlessly integrating the planning layer and the visibility layer, we can then continuously actually optimize both our plan, but also our supply chain execution.
So, how do you advance if you look at this graph and you want to move to the right? Judith?
Okay. Sorry. Yes. How you advance is basically you need to have like an iterative approach of building up that data network, and basically by integrating your supply chain partners and then focusing on the different planning capabilities that we just shared. And maybe Rolf will share one very concrete example how a company advanced in the planning journey.
Rolf, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Judith. Thanks, Martijn. Indeed, I have a nice example, and I think this is also a nice example because here you can see that advancing in planning requires visibility and transparency in supply chain in the first place. So this case is about an energy network operator, or actually I would say they also develop energy networks. And they ask basically for our support. And initially, this support was focused on finding the cost-saving opportunities on their side, because as you are all aware, the implications of the energy transitions forces many companies in this area to reinvent themselves. And so they were facing that the old energy infrastructure network required significant investments. So they initially asked us, can you help us with starting identify the cost savings opportunity? And basically, when we were going through that company and deep diving in the various functions, we found a bit of a specific animal there, and that was related to the planning function of that company. And as you can see here on the slide, that planning function in the company was about strategic, tactical, and operational planning capabilities, and in order to maintain their network or replace transformers, cables, but also simple things like connecting consumers and companies to the energy grid. And what we also saw there is that when looking more closely at the planning function, we recognized together with the client that it was not a matter of cost savings that we should aim for in that function, but it would be rather an area for additional investments to increase the efficiency and the effectiveness of their network. Because if we look at the next slide, when we deep dive also in the planning area of what is going to happen, but also about feeding back information of the actuals back into the planning capability. And that resulted in that they worked with a yearly activity plan, and that hardly could ever be met every year. Also, they had certain bottlenecks in their planning, because if you have plan replacement or maintenance in your network, you need to have certain assets available, but manpower was lacking in many circumstances. While on the other hand, when deep diving into that manpower dimension, we also saw that there was idle capacity, so something was wrong. And also the end-to-end view was missing. And so if there was a job to be done, maintenance job, the capacity could be there, but then supplies were lacking, or contractors that were hired to support in a certain maintenance job were also not there at the right moment. So there was a lot of misalignment. So what we identified together with the client, that we need to advance in those planning capabilities, because we see that that is an important lever for increasing efficiency and effectiveness in the company. Investing now would reduce the cost in the future. And the objectives that we defined together with the client was, okay, what do we want of that planning capability in the future? Where do we want to land? What is the end game? So first of all, we decided together, or defined with the client, that obviously the first thing to do is that we need to make sure that we do the right things in an efficient way. But also we need to build an accurate and robust planning capability that can deal with the future challenges that we face. And with robust, it should be able to recognize multiple scenarios when disruptions occur, for example, already talked about. And it should also be able to maximize the utilization of the scarce or the bottleneck resources. So what we did, we defined the project together with the client, and to Judith already mentioned about, first of all, the key foundational elements here are the vertical and the horizontal integration. Although those arrows might be a bit counterintuitive in this picture, but with respect to vertical integration, also here it was about connecting the strategic, tactical and operational planning capabilities in one process, but also making sure that all the other functions like procurement, like supply chain, like resource management, like finance were also connected to that integrated planning process. And with horizontal integration, we mean indeed the connection, stretching out the planning visibility towards the customers, towards the client, but also other stakeholders in the field of planning. So when we had defined that foundation, the next one was to think about the planning capabilities. And here you see some highlights of what planning at that company was about. So first of all, on the left side, you see with the clock, it has to have a clear objective. So the planning cycle in this case is about doing the right things at the right moment with the right capacity. But it's always good to have that end in mind. And directly on the right to that, you see the cockpit that is actually helping to achieve those objectives. And that is an important element, because that cockpit requires full transparency over the full planning process and the supply chain in order to make the correct decisions and to define the right priorities. So that is about visibility. Also, what you see here in this picture, what is related to demand characteristics, is about, you see two converging arcs, basically, that in the end is a kind of converging the planning accuracy from the long term towards the execution in the end. The company didn't have really a demand supply matching mechanism like SNOP or IBP in place. So we needed to define in that vision a kind of mechanism that at least at certain points in time touches or make that match between demand and supply. And also what is important there is that the planning is indeed largely digitized, relating to also what we identified in our study, that they really wanted to be a digital champion in that area. And also very important that you see that on the right side is, and the top right side is basically, there was a connection with operations, but it wasn't out from a planning perspective that the planning process defined on a task-by-task basis what the operational capabilities should do in the field, but is giving them a bit of flexibility by defining 2 weeks of work packages towards the people in the field. So that in case of any disruption, they could have the flexibility to change jobs or make different choices in what job should come next. In that case, you get a bit of agility to the chain. So next, what is also very important, I mentioned that already a bit in the horizontal integration, that was about the connections with external parties. So obviously it is about the connections with contractors, with suppliers, and with your customers. And the idea was that that should be largely digitized, and that suppliers, for example, have also visibility on planning parameters that are relevant for them, so that they can make sure that the materials that they are going to supply are there in the right place at the right moment. And also, for example, customers that can directly plan their activities into the system, of course constrained to certain windows, into the system of the company. Maybe also interesting to mention, and that's more an operational external factor, you see that on the top of this picture. It's also external factors like weather forecast were also envisioned to be part of this planning process, because if you do jobs outside, the weather can be a restrictive factor that you need to take into account. Although that's more on the operational side, those kind of things were also envisioned by this company. And how should you do that? How should that be enabled? Yeah, you can't do it without technology. And you can see that on this slide. And this is really basically the next steps in the vision, because as Judith already explained this, also you see that by the end of the bar, there is also a little cloud. So they also wanted to use cloud solutions.
I was wondering, is this visualization, this visual also created at the start of the whole project to explain what you are going to do with this company?
Yes, so that was really the starting point, actually, to start in advancing the planning capabilities. And to be honest, even this wasn't too easy to get this, because there were many stakeholders, many departments, and there was indeed a lack of visibility, which also means that there were a lot of different perspectives that need to get aligned on where are we heading with the planning function. So getting this done, this took us, by the way, 2 to 3 months with many workshops to get to one aligned vision. Obviously, this is a summary of it, but there was quite some work in getting this done.
Yeah, it is in Dutch, but all these elements are related to this company, so it's actually made for this company. This visual, for this whole project.
Correct.
All right. So, and what are the next steps for this company?
Yeah, that's a good question, because indeed, creating a vision is one thing, but realizing that is another thing. So in detail, you can, if you could go to the next slide, Martijn. Yeah, you can implement a vision in basically the traditional 2 ways. So you can do it by a revolution, doing it 3 different stages. First, making sure that the fragmented planning functionality is transparent, that we have one source of truth, and that we know who is doing what. That is the first stage. Then talking about digitalization solutions, doing advanced scenario forecasts, bringing in advanced scenario forecast solutions. So that was definitely a third stage. And we took basically a time frame of started, and actually the client at this point in time is trying to realize stage 1. And how we did it is try to embed the vision on their integrated planning into their regular improvement cadence. They had already quite integrated planning alive. So that was the first step. Second step is, at that point in time, after you have done the qualification, you also realize, okay, but we're still missing some elements to realize that vision. So we have to find also initiatives that were put also in that backlog for realization. And on top of that, there was a steering team that had control over those initiatives that were labeled as contributing to the planning initiatives. in order to monitor the total program. Wanted to advance, setting the objectives to advance in your planning functions and realizing that really in a roadmap towards the future.
I was wondering, you've probably seen a lot of companies, and this is not
current systems that they have. So they try to get upgrades on their systems, try to advance step by step, but do not always really have that end game in mind and do not really understand what advancing in planning capabilities could mean for them. So what I liked here
differently than maybe consumer goods companies.
Oh, that's definitely the case. Yes, there was a really need for change, although they were also careful, as you can recall what I mentioned, that they didn't want to go for the revolutionary part.
Free to ask more questions. To Judith, looking at your research, do you see a difference between new and older companies and the size of companies relating to the maturity in end-to-end supply chain visibility and capabilities?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, looking into new versus old companies, I think especially, let's say, for new players on the market, they don't have, let's say, a huge legacy world in terms of systems and data. So it's much easier actually to build up such a connected data network and to enable the visibility. So I would say for new companies, the journey is it's much quicker compared to what you call here old companies. But then there's also a big difference between smaller and larger companies. And what the research basically found out is that for most of the supply chain capabilities, actually the larger companies have invested more significantly and have achieved a higher level of maturity compared to smaller companies.
Another question related to this. With the FMCG industries, many clients use different ERP systems and instances. How was the integration done, or is there a need for all parties involved to use a common platform?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in that case, and also in the cases that you have seen, most of the companies have a lot of different ERP systems, a lot of different source systems. And what we have done in those cases is to establish an integration layer. So basically a data network, or what you called earlier data lake, which connects those different source systems and their data into let's say one common data network, and then we can put those visibility layers or planning layers basically on top of that on top of that data network.
So there is no need to harmonize all your ERP systems to one instance to get that.
Not necessarily, no. There are also different mechanisms rather than like harmonizing the different ERP systems. There are also possibilities to work with those integration mechanisms, connect different data. So, for example, we've been also working with a company that very frequently acquires new companies and which always bring in new IT solutions, new ERP instances. And there it would literally not be possible to harmonize all the ERP systems. So in those cases, it makes sense to work on that data network. But it's also a bit a case by case decision. What makes more sense.
And I think with the open APIs becoming more common, it's way more easy to connect system, especially to a data lake or a network, than, for example, 10 years ago.
Exactly. And I think these are really like now the important architecture principles. When you invest into those capabilities, always make sure to invest into, let's say, platforms that support, for example, open APIs, or that support building microservices, or that specific use cases on top of those solutions, to make sure that you can actually also build up your differentiating supply chain capabilities.
Another question, and keep on asking these questions. If they are not answered, we can also answer these questions during the after talk after the hour. Another question: do you have best practices examples on how to discuss with your partners, suppliers, customers to allow data sharing? In some industries, data sensitivity is quite high. We see high reluctance in sharing data. So how are these challenges overcome?
I think in a lot of cases, those challenges can be overcome by really making sure that both parties actually benefit from those data sharing. And if we look into the area of integrated planning, to basically share data with your customers or get data from your customers, it actually has a huge benefit to the customers in the end of the day, because you can actually plan your supply chain in a better way, can secure higher level of availability and OTIF. So it's really also a change journey to basically enable a more open and connected supply chain network and integrate those partners in a better way. And then obviously, I mean, there are certain industries where it's maybe easier compared to others to share information. And then in some cases, there are also then solutions actually to acquire external data that can help to increase the accuracy of planning, like web page traffic data, social listening, and any kind of external data.
When you look at the FMCG world, a lot of retailers might be a bit reluctant to share point of sale data. But if you are talking to a retailer as an FMCG manufacturer, it's also useful not to focus on all the point of sale data, but specific product groups where you can both win, where there are a lot of gains to win, and just start with some data both parties are willing to share, and not talk about all the point of sale data.
Yeah, exactly. And if you start sharing some data and both parties see the benefits, then there's also more openness actually to share additional data and actually become more active in that seamless data sharing and collaboration.
Another question, possibly to Rolf, about the energy sector. COVID has obviously increased the sense of urgency to digitalize, but there's a risk associated with this or not, and maybe the energy company clearly had their feet on the ground in terms of speed to implement.
Yeah, so that didn't really change the agenda of this energy company, but however, what we see, and I also noticed that with other clients, indeed, that there is a need for speed up digitalization. However, there are also constraints to that, and in many cases, it's not the budget, but it is also the time. As many companies at this moment also struggling a lot with trying to deal with the challenges that they have and get their operations right. So digitalization, although it is a high priority, also requires a lot of business effort to get it implemented. And I think what we also see is that at the moment is also a bottleneck for many companies. So to come back to your question, Martijn, I think for this energy company, it didn't change really the priority. They stuck with that plan. But in other cases, we do see indeed that digitalization is going to be a priority. However, there are also constraints to consider there.
Another question, maybe for Judith. Can you explain a bit more about the idea of a digital twin? Or there are different approaches to digital twin. So maybe you can elaborate more. What is a digital twin, and how does it relate to your end-to-end supply chain visibility?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, in this case, and I'm fully aware there are a lot of different definitions of what a digital twin is, but what is actually meant here is basically to have a digital copy about what is happening in your supply chain so that you can see instantly the status of your supply chain flows, the inventories of your suppliers, the capacity used, meaning the inbound flows, the internal manufacturing operations, but eventually then also the usage at the customer or eventually the consumer to understand also customer and consumer feedback and the way they are utilizing your products basically to improve the product. So it's basically a full, let's say, a digital representation of what has happened to your product all the way from components and materials to the end consumer.
And it basically is like a simulation model. If you have this, you can also do scenarios, what can happen and what should happen.
Exactly, or where can you improve?
Yeah,
yeah.
Also very important. Another question, and we also almost getting to the end. There are more questions than we have time, but maybe you can go into the lounge later on after 5. And real-time updates possible in these cases. Judith, do you have an answer for that?
Yeah, I mean, it depends a little bit. I mean, I would say you can at least get like updates on the most important milestones, and basically by integrating also those external information, there's a higher level of visibility that can be generated also in the last mile area.
Right, like I said, there are way more questions than we have time. I would like to thank you, Judith, Rolf, and Louis for joining us. So thank you. And we will join you in the lounge after this. So thank you for joining this webinar. On the left-hand side, you see a self-assessment we have created with some well-known multinationals, where you can fill out a questionnaire with yes/no questions, 90 of them, and then you will see your white spots in your visibility on an operational, tactical, or strategic level, inbound, internally, or outbound. So this is where you can download through this link. And to the right, you see the research report Judith has elaborated on. So thank you. Next week, we have another webinar Wednesday, and then we will talk about demand sensing at Henkel. And then we'll Henkel talking about what they have been doing in that part. And with this, I would like to wrap up. And thanks again to you, Judith, Rolf, and Louis, for explaining end-to-end supply chain visibility with some insightful use cases. And hopefully the audience, we will see you next week on Webinar Wednesday. And now we go to the lounge. So basically, we're going to sit down at a table a table in the lounge. So go to the lounge if you want to talk with one of us, and we can discuss this topic further. So thanks a lot, everybody, and see you next week, or see you in the lounge right after this.